Hello once again. Thank you for making it here on time and for joining our webinar for today. As we begin today's webinar, I invite us to just type on the chat who you are, where you're joining us from, and which agency you could be representing or working with. So we will start today's webinar, and I'll start by saying good morning, good afternoon, good evening from wherever you're joining us from. And also allow me to appreciate all of us who are joining us these last days of Ramadan. I know we are just about to wind up the holy month, and just taking this time to join us, we want to appreciate you for joining us and joining us on time. As we begin today's webinar on psychosocial support for students in Gaza, I will introduce myself. I'm Esther Mbao. I'm the Psychosocial Support and Social Emotional Learning Coordinator at INEE, and I will be the moderator for this session today. I will also be monitoring the web chats so that we are able to post our questions there and get them responded to by our panelists. And as we begin today's webinar, a few general instructions is that we shall have our videos off. For those who are participants, we'll also have our mics muted to ensure that our panelists are able to present without any interruptions. Also, please note that we shall be recording today's session and it shall be uploaded on our website and on our YouTube page for future reference and for anyone who was not able to join but would like to connect with what we discussed today. So as we begin, please make use of the Q&A feature on your Zoom account to post any questions at any point in time that you will have for the panelists. And also feel free to post your feedback and any other suggestions on our Q&A feature. As we begin today's session, I would like to highlight that this is a follow-up to a webinar we had last month on understanding the MHPSS and situational analysis of what is currently happening in Gaza. We know we have been having a crisis from last year, October, and we are looking at the mental health and the psychosocial support of students, but also the general situation in Gaza, because students do not exist in a vacuum, but they're in an ecosystem. However, today's session is focused on psychosocial support for students in Gaza. Next slide, please. The purpose of today's webinar is for us to be able to understand the past and the current psychosocial challenges for the children in Gaza. This will help us be able to form a good grounding into understanding how do we move forward and what are some of the strategies that we can offer when it comes to psychosocial support in Gaza for the students. Our panel today is coming from INEE as well as from NRC, and NRC will be presenting some of the findings that they have come across in their work at Gaza, and they will also be presenting what are some of the strategies they're currently using and what it means moving forward. We shall also have a Q&A session where we'll be able to answer some of the questions that you will have presented in the Q&A chat. And then from there, we'll be able to look at what are the next steps moving forward. For today, allow me to introduce our panelists, and then we shall get into the different presentations that we shall have today. We shall have opening remarks from Dima Nastas. Dima is a member of the PSS SEL working group at INEE. This webinar is planned and supported by INEE's secretariat, but at a deeper level, it is supported by the working group that is under the PSS SEL theme. We shall also have Fabio Mancini and Dr. Ritesh Shah after the opening remarks to talk about the learning and what they have gathered from a report that they put together titled The Brief on the Learning on the Margins Report. We shall also have a presentation on school-based psychosocial support for students in Gaza, presented by Camila Lodi and Galind Hab, who will present through a recorded video. This is a research-informed framework for providing support and identifying needs in the aftermath of what is currently happening. And then we shall have Daria and Assad from NRC looking at the PSS education in emergency interventions. And Assad will give a personal reflection given he's based in Gaza, and Daria will also build up on that and look at what is currently happening. With that, next slide, I invite Dima to be able to give us the opening remarks on behalf of the PSS SEL working group. And then from there, I will invite Fabio to take it from there and present on their brief on the learning on the margins report. Over to you, Dima.
Thank you, Esther. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to our webinar on psychosocial support for students in Gaza. I'm honored to give the opening remarks on behalf of the PSS SEL working group as we gather to continue to discuss a topic of utmost importance, one that touches the heart and minds of all who are concerned about the well-being of young people in Gaza. In the midst of ongoing challenges and hardships, it is crucial to recognize the resilience and the strength exhibited by the students of Gaza, even as they really have no other option, as we all keep hoping for all this to end. However, we cannot overlook the significant psychosocial challenges they continue to face on a daily basis. The impact of conflict, violence, and psychoeconomic instability on their mental health cannot be underestimated. Today, we have came together with a shared purpose to start exploring effective strategies and interventions aimed at providing psychosocial support to these students, even as we hope for a ceasefire. We believe that by fostering a supportive environment and equipping them with the necessary tools, we can empower them to overcome adversity and thrive despite the circumstances. This webinar today is a follow-up from the one we had last month, which was a situational analysis of the MHPSS status in Gaza. We had several stakeholders share what they found on the ground and what they had started to do in response, even as they hopefully started to plan for the future. Today, we have NRC sharing the work they are doing, focus on the students in terms of their psychosocial support once schools reopen. Let us not forget that psychosocial well-being is a significant processor to learning and is essential for academic achievement. It thus has important bearing on the future prospect of both individuals and societies. PSS and SEL approaches work best when integrated into a different spheres of young people's lives. This education setting brings children, their peers, parents, families, and communities together. They can help create a supportive environment that promotes improved psychosocial well-being. Throughout this webinar, we will hear the esteemed experts and practitioners who have committed through their work to understanding and addressing the psychosocial needs of students in Gaza. Together, we will delve into the causes of these challenges, identify some best practices for interventions, and discuss the critical role of education in promoting resilience and well-being. But beyond the discussions and presentations, let us remember that the ultimate goal of our efforts today is to make a tangible differences in the lives of these young individuals. Each idea shared and each insight gained bring us a step closer to providing the support and care that they so rightfully deserve. As we embark on this journey together, let us keep in mind the words of Nelson Mandela. Education is the most powerful weapon which you can use to change the world. When circumstances allow us, let us harness the power of education to uplift and empower the students of Gaza, ensuring that they have the opportunity to fulfill their potential and contribute positively to their communities and beyond. Thank you once again for joining today. Your presence here reflects your commitment to making a positive impact, and I am confident that together we can pave the way for a brighter future for the students in Gaza. Without further ado, let us begin our exploration into how we can offer psychosocial support for students. And thank you, everyone. And over to you, Esther.
Thank you, Dima, for that. Very important to remind us about psychosocial support and the importance of education. And now I hand it over to Fabio, Mancini, and Dr. Ritesha. Welcome.
Thank you very much. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, colleagues. My name is Fabio Mancini, and I'm covering the Regional Education Advisor position for NRC, covering Middle East and North Africa. So while preparing for this webinar, we were thinking, as already mentioned by Esther actually, that to really understand the current status and scale of psychosocial needs in Gaza and Palestine, it is important to remind us that most of the concerns facing Gaza Strip, and in fact, all Palestine today, did not start, as we know, on October 7, but rather are the product of a protracted crisis, which has affected generation of young people. To this end, to really explore what happened in the past, we are glad to have with us Dr. Ritesh Shah, Senior Lecturer of Comparative and International Education at the University of Auckland. Ritesh, over the past 15 years, really developed several research exploring the transformative potential of education to address the legacy and impact of conflict and crisis, but also some of the challenges which prevent it from serving this function. Since 2010, Ritesh has spent time in Palestine, researching and evaluating various psychosocial support programs supporting children's well-being, including NRC Better Learning Program starting 2014. In the period of 2019-2022, and with the support of DG ECHO and in partnership with NRC, really did a work in Palestine to explore the trends in children's well-being, looking at both Gaza Strip and West Bank, in a period, as we know, marked by pandemic, escalation, conflict, as well as the worsening condition of the occupation. Without further ado, I think it's time now to look at key highlights and funding coming from the study, as I said, conducted between 2019-2022, learning on the margin, and I hand over the floor to Ritesh. Thank you. Ritesh, over to you.
Thank you, Fabio, for that introduction, and salam alaikum to colleagues joining from across the MENA region, and particularly Palestinian friends and colleagues. Between 2019 and 2022, as Fabio noted, the University of Auckland led a research study in partnership with NRC in Palestine and with the generous support of the European Union Civil Protection and Humanitarian Aid Operations Office, or DG ECHO. What we were aiming to do was longitudinally track well-being of learners and later teachers in both Gaza and West Bank. This was done over a period marked by a number of significant events, including the Great March of Return, escalations in conflict in Gaza in 2019 and again in 2022, the coronavirus pandemic, and the subsequent closures and reopenings of schools, alongside the ongoing occupation and an increasingly dire political and economic situation in Gaza and rising settler violence in West Bank. Learner well-being was tracked using existing program data from NRC as part of its implementation of the Better Learning Program. Specifically, items from its Student Learning and Emergencies checklist, which you can actually access on the INEE PSS SEL toolbox, measured students' sense of safety, self-regulation skills, self-efficacy, perceived levels of social support, academic functioning, and feelings of hope. And these were used to track across 4 successive academic years. A total of 680 students, we're still on the first slide, sorry. A total of 680 students from Gaza were surveyed at the beginning of each academic year, 229 male, 410 female, and they ranged in age from 10 to 17 years old. These data were matched and statistically analyzed. All the trends I shared today are statistically significant. Importantly, in November 2022, I visited Gaza and alongside colleagues from NRC's Gaza office, spoke with students and teachers in targeted schools. Their insights and experiences helped to provide explanation and nuance for the trends I'm about to share. Full details about the methodology of the study are available in the published report online, which we'll share at the end of my presentation. Now on, next slide, please. So now on to the trends observed in Gaza. Here I will present only what the situation was in 2019, and then at the end of 4 years in 2022. Firstly, on the statement, I feel safe at home. In 2019, 81.5%, or more than 4 out of 5 children surveyed, agreed or strongly agreed with the statement. By 2022, this had declined to less than 1 in 5, or just 12.5% of children feeling the same. Secondly, on the statement, things will turn out better in the future, 4 out of 5 children, or 80.5%, agreed or strongly agreed with the statement in 2019. By 2022, this had also declined so that less than 1 out of 5, or 17.4% of children, felt the same. Thirdly, on the statement, I can easily concentrate on my schoolwork, 76.4% of children agreed or strongly agreed with the statement in 2019. By 2022, this had declined precipitously to the point that only 5.8% felt similarly. Lastly, on the statements, when I am scared, I can calm myself down, as well as the statement, when I feel angry, I can calm myself down. Approximately 47% of students agreed or strongly agreed with each of these statements in 2019. In 2022, this had declined so that around 6% of students felt the same. What these responses indicate is that students' capacity to regulate their own emotions and identify solutions to problems they face, retain a sense of hope for the future, focus on learning, and feel connected to their parents have all diminished significantly since 2019. The greatest declines during the extended period of school closures in 2020-21 academic year, coupled with the escalation in May 2021, which is then reflected in the 2021-22 academic year data. These declines also tended to be greater for females than males, and for those students studying in the most vulnerable schools due to both political and economic circumstances. I want to stress that all of these declines were prevalent before the current start of the war in Gaza, and it is fully expected based on recent assessments that the situation would be even graver than it already was at the start of the 2022-2023 academic year when we ended this study. Next, please. As noted, with colleagues from NRC, we conducted a series of focus groups with children and teachers in November 2022 to understand these trends and the reason for them. What we found is that for children and households in Gaza, the period of the pandemic was one marked firstly by a worsening economic situation due to restrictions on movement, as well as the loss of employment, as this first quote indicates. Marked increases in short-term unemployment, declines in household income, and increased food insecurity meant that during the pandemic, many more Palestinian households fell into poverty, and this created increased strain on children. Secondly, there were significant challenges in children's capacity and ability to learn when schools were shut. In a separate survey NRC conducted in September 2020, less than half the parents surveyed reported their children participating in e-learning activities due to a lack of electricity as well as devices for learning. For many children, their inability to regularly participate in learning over the course of nearly 18 months of COVID-related learning disruptions left them with fears and anxieties of permanently falling behind. Thirdly, children face social isolation in their homes during the pandemic. For girls in particular, schools provide a space for them to establish social context, practice their choice and agency, as well as a legitimate reason to leave home without the questioning and supervision of male adults. Attending school is often key to girls' self-esteem, autonomy, and future career development. And these elements of well-being and hope were especially affected by school closures. Research carried out in the midst of the pandemic identified that nearly 22% of children were reported to be facing domestic violence and neglect, and this had gender dimensions to this as well, with boys most likely to face physical violence and girls more likely to encounter emotional abuse. I bring these challenges in light of the situation today as, again, conditions of economic depravity, food insecurity, a lack of access to learning, and social isolation are ones facing the vast majority of Gazan children as we speak now. Next slide, please. And so when children were finally able to return to school, partially in 2021 and fully in 2022, they felt both a sense of hope, but also new forms of anxiety and worry, and unfortunately, violence. When schools first returned, there was a real fear of contracting the coronavirus, more because of the social stigma associated with it in Gaza than fear of actually falling gravely ill. But there was also a sense of joy in being able to connect with peers, but also reduced enjoyment with the actual learning occurring because of the explicit focus on supporting students to catch up quickly with academic learning at the expense of other subjects like sports and arts, which many children only experience inside the school in Gaza. Unfortunately, in May 2021, just as students were preparing for their end-of-year exams and in the period of Ramadan, armed conflict escalated again, particularly in areas like Rafah and other border areas. Schools were shut again, and children were confined to their homes. While the conflict itself was short-lived, it was an intense period for the children who lived through it, with many feeling vulnerable and unprotected. So when we wrapped up the research at the end of 22, children had started a new academic year, but with a heavy heart, remembering all the struggles they had been through over the last 4 years, and unable to feel that they were either safe or protected anymore. These chronic cycles of insecurity and the vulnerability this creates for an entire generation of children has left an indelible and negative impact on children's well-being in Gaza. Next slide, please. And so I end and connect to the rest of the panel today with a word of caution. Having done research on a range of psychosocial interventions in Gaza since 2010, all with a focus on supporting children's well-being and resilience, I've become increasingly concerned with the limitations of this work in the context of an ongoing occupation and a long unresolved and, dare I say, unjust conflict. Time and time again, we observe a cycle whereby acute crises is followed by a period of intense action focused on providing psychosocial support and recovery to affected children with the aim to help them to return to a status quo, which is still marred by social, political, and economic insecurity because the occupation remains ongoing. Specifically in Gaza, children who are 18 years old today have lived through 6 different wars, including the current one. In 2015, it led me to write an academic article where I asked the question, is supporting recovery or normalcy in a context like Gaza sufficient? I concluded then, and feel even more strongly now, that what is required is transformative action, which challenges the status quo of the occupation, moving beyond calls for a ceasefire to that of a permanent solution to the over 75-year occupation. Otherwise, psychosocial programming will be palliative at best, necessary for sure as a temporary band-aid solution, but unlikely to be sustainable or sufficient. I want to close with the 2 quotes you see from young children I spoke to in Gaza in 2022, which in my mind sum up the nature of the struggles facing young people there today. I hope it reminds us to think and imagine beyond immediate responses and to challenge our own organizations, our political leadership, and the wider humanitarian architecture to not settle for the status quo in the aftermath of the current war in Gaza. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Ritesha, for your presentation and for giving us a historical background of where we are coming from with the Gaza situation. Please note the report he has quoted from will be shared with all the other resources for PSS SEL through email after this webinar. We'll also post the links. I see it's already been posted there for you to be able to start accessing. As you are ending the presentation, Dr. Ritesh, and you were talking about what the children feel. It's only right to remind us that in this context, PSS would mean a process of facilitating resilience within the students, within individuals, within families, and within communities, because the aim of PSS is to help individuals recover after a crisis that has disrupted their lives and to enhance their ability to return to a normalcy after experiencing adverse events. Having said that, I invite our next speaker, Camilla Lodi, who will be able to give a presentation on school-based PSS support for students in Gaza, and then she'll be able to invite the next speaker as well, who offered a recorded video. So Camilla, welcome and give your presentation.
Thank you, Esther. My name is Camilla Lodi. I'm the head of psychosocial support in education in emergency for the Norwegian Refugee Council. And I must say that I have been working in this sector for 24 years, and I have never been confronted with this level of distraction, desperation, and despair. There is no way to flee for the persons in Gaza. So in October, a group of us from the University of Tromsø, the Philadelphia Veteran Medical Center, Al-Quds Gaza University, the University of Melbourne, and the Belgian Red Cross got together, overwhelmed.
We cannot hear you. Camilla? As we wait for Camilla to work on her connectivity, please note you can post your questions using the Q&A feature as we wait for Camilla to come back. In the meantime, Daria, would you like to proceed with her presentation as we wait for her?
Sure. Thanks very much, Esther. If we could skip to...
Okay, I think she's back.
Okay.
Yes, sorry, my connection maybe in Amman is not good. So I was saying, yes, that today it's about providing a snapshot of this paper, which aims to share research-based knowledge on possible and natural reactions and needs that could be anticipated, providing a research-based framework for planning and implementing school-based psychosocial support in Gaza, and supporting the frontline workers. Thanks. For the next slide. We started by asking this question: how do we set realistic educational goals? How do we create an environment of significance and hope in this situation? How do we help children eventually returning to learning when their needs are not being met? All individual children, youth, adults have been exposed to potential traumatic events and have experienced loss. Children and youth have become even more vulnerable because their parents have been affected. UNICEF estimates that almost all of Gaza's 1.2 million children are in need of mental health and psychosocial support. So let us now focus or understand trauma and grief before going back to education in emergency, listening to this 7-minute video from our colleague in Philadelphia, Gerlinde Harb.
Hello. Thank you for having me. My name is Gerlinde Harb, and I'm a clinical psychologist in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and I've been affiliated many years with the Philadelphia Veterans Medical Center, where I have been doing research as a research psychologist on post-traumatic stress. And I have also collaborated over the last 10 years with colleagues at the Norwegian Refugee Council, doing work on research and clinical interventions for refugees. Today, I want to talk briefly about the mental health challenges that we're likely to see in children in the aftermath of the current crisis in Gaza. We can expect that the mental health consequences will be more complex than what we have seen in previous wars. Children are affected by important and transformative experiences in their lives. And in this situation, we see that they're confronted with both potentially traumatic events as well as personal losses. The traumatic events children are experiencing include threats to their own life. All children are living in fear of dying right now. There are traumatic injuries, including amputations and other serious injury. Children are also learning of the sudden loss of loved ones, and that is a potential traumatic event. And they're witnessing, of course, violence and the effects of violence, and that includes gruesome imagery, scenes of death, and injury. In addition to these traumatic events, children are also experiencing losses. These losses include death of family members, including the loss of primary caregivers, the death of friends and members of their community, loss of physical functioning, their own physical functioning, and that of caregivers, which of course results in also a loss of independence. And then we have the widespread loss of homes, the schools, personal belongings, and just a general loss of a sense of safety. Now, let's talk about what we know about grief and trauma. We know that grief is a natural reaction to loss. And we also know that it tends to subside naturally, given time and space to process the loss. After initial emotional upheaval, many children show successful coping and sort of gradually move towards a more future-oriented mindset. However, we also have to be on the lookout for extended grief reactions in children. And what we can see is poor school grades, social difficulty and withdrawing from social interactions, engaging in risky behaviors, or even suicidal thoughts. Healing after being exposed to traumatic events is also a natural process. Most people and children do recover naturally from traumatic exposure if they're supported by their environment. Signs of longer-term post-traumatic reactions that we see include post-traumatic stress symptoms that include recurrent intrusive memories and thoughts of the trauma that can interfere with daily functioning. We see avoidance behavior, and we see very strong emotions like fear and anger, as well as, again, social withdrawal and sleep disturbance that can be pretty severe and include trauma-related nightmares. We also have to acknowledge that in this particular war, there's an increased risk for longer lasting problems because the exposure to these traumatic events is so severe and immediate and repeated and ongoing. We also see that caregivers may not be able to be the supportive people to support children in their natural recovery, both physically and psychologically. And then also there are additional stressors in this current war that are particularly widespread, such as displacement and hunger and lack of healthcare, and all of those can affect the psychological functioning of children and families. So we can see that trauma and loss are not separate, they're very much intertwined in this situation. Now let's talk about helping children cope with the aftermath of trauma and loss. After we reestablish a sense of physical safety, of course, we can start to support children to process their grief and learn ways to cope. Caring adults, whether that's parents, caregivers, teachers, family members, can really help children during this time. And support and education early on can provide children with those supportive adults who are consistent presence in their lives, even if their primary caregivers aren't able to provide that support for one reason or another. Also allowing children to express the full range of feelings that they may be experiencing. Sadness, anger, guilt, despair, distress, pain, all of those are natural reactions to what they've experienced. And finally, we can teach children effective coping strategies for coping with emotional difficulties and also for dealing with their sleep disturbance after trauma. Knowing what children need to recover will help them get back to being children who can effectively learn and continue building their lives and their future. Thank you.
So I'll go back to the presentation with the next slide. In this paper that I am presenting right now, we had outlined these stages that you can see on the slide for planning purposes of education in emergency interventions. And 6 months later, after this paper was written, we are still in the initial phase of war, where staying alive and surviving are still the main focus. The second phase is about basic needs, focusing on finding food, shelter, reuniting with the family, trying to reestablishing a sense of safety. The preparing to go back to school for the cluster in Palestine has been identified as phase 2 once the ceasefire starts. Here is where we provide support to the supporters. We plan for teachers to go back to learning centers, change the educational expectation and focus more on psychosocial support. The phase of back to school is being a gradual approach with a month of play-based activities, recreational materials, restarting conversations with parents towards a regular school routine is a gradual transition to soft academic approaches, application of trauma-sensitive approaches to support restoring academic functioning, followed by the last long-term follow-up, strengthening self-regulation for at least a period of 2 years, providing space and resources for grieving, and provide adapted educational measures. If we look into the next slide, in this paper, we had provided the example of NRC signature psychosocial support classroom-based better learning program, nowadays implemented in 34 countries, but started actually in Gaza 12 years ago. It is based on the 5 universal recovery principles, and its main aim is to support recovery of learning capacity for children who have gone through acute stress and or trauma. So you can see there on the slide, Better Learning Program 1 is a general classroom-based psychosocial support approach targeted at all children and youth at any stage of emergency. The orange one, the Better Learning Program 2, is a small group or classroom intervention to support restoring learning for academic underachievers, while the number 3 is a specialized approach to address trauma, trauma-induced nightmares, and supports regaining control and self-regulate. So this will be crucial together with having to restore or update the referral system in order to work together and refer specific mental health cases. If we move to the next slide. I will finally end with this essential need to provide self-care for teachers and frontliners, operators, reminding teachers about their mission and purpose, providing psychoeducation on normal responses to trauma and loss, encouraging peer-to-peer support, routine and structures, and providing resources and limit demands that are requested and put on the shoulders of teachers. Back to you, Esther. Thank you.
Thank you, Camilla, for that presentation, and even for winding it up by reminding us that even as we're looking at the psychosocial support for students, we need to look at the people who are going to offer the psychosocial support to them, who are the teachers and the other frontline workers. I personally keep saying people cannot give what they don't have. So you can't ask someone to take care of others if you're not asking them to also take care of themselves. As we continue with our webinar, allow me to acknowledge that we do have colleagues and educators joining us from displaced communities in Rafah, Gaza. Allow me to acknowledge them and to say thank you for being a part of this conversation. We want to just appreciate that you have taken the time to connect with us and for us to be able to engage with you in this conversation. As we go to the last presentation, which will be done by Daria, and then we will get a voice note from Assad, who wanted to join us but is not able to join us because of connectivity and other related issues in Gaza. I would like to emphasize that the conversation we are having today is about offering PSS and looking at the importance of offering it and looking at what are the things that we can do. As we go to Daria, I just want to highlight 3 objectives that we usually look at when it comes to PSS educational activities. The first one is supporting learners development of skills and knowledge through activities that focus on life skills, culturally appropriate coping mechanisms, vocational skills, and conflict management techniques. The other objective of PSS is to enhance and to try to enhance emotional well-being by promoting feelings of safety, trust in others, self-worth, and hope for the future despite the current circumstances. And then we also try to strengthen learners' social well-being through activities that build relationships with the community around them, to build a sense of belonging in their community, provide access to socially appropriate roles, and resume cultural activities and traditions. Having said that, we will look at NRC's PSS Education in Emergencies Interventions. And to give us this reflection, I invite Daria, who will then take us through the recording by Assad. Welcome, Daria.
Thanks very much, Esther. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. My name is Daria. I'm an emergency education specialist with NRC, currently supporting our team in Palestine to deliver the response in Gaza. We started our education response with a focus on MHPSS and structured recreational activities around 1 month ago on the ground in Gaza. This is in line with phase 1 of the education sector emergency response plan. I'll talk about that a little bit more in a moment, but to emphasize that phase 1 is what we can do right now. It's what we can do while hostilities are ongoing, while the situation remains as dynamic and severe as it is. Within the first month, we've reached over 2,000 girls and boys with a minimum of 2 sessions per week. The slide here mentions 7 displacement sites, but it's gone up to 8 since the slide was prepared. And we're continuing to scale up as we move forward as well. In these sites, we're using available spaces. So as you can see from the picture, sometimes that means spaces outdoors, sometimes it's indoor spaces, and sometimes it's safe spaces that we're constructing with materials that are available. We're using a package that is very much focused on NRC's Better Learning program, other internal NRC materials as well, including the Misket storybook package. I saw a question in the Q&A about storybooks, and I would very much encourage those resources. We found that they're extremely well received by the children themselves, by the parents that we're engaging with, also our colleagues, the NRC team, using these storybooks with their children as well and finding them very helpful, very meaningful, especially when they focus on themes of displacement or distress in a way that's relatable for children. For us, the objective right now is to support the resilience of these children, to provide some kind of line of continuity to teaching and learning, to build a sense of hope, to equip children with the skill sets that were mentioned by Esther and our NRC colleagues, and to try to provide a few moments where we can remind children that war and grief and distress is not all that life is and not all that it's going to be. This work comes off the back of NRC's 10-year presence in Gaza. Up until October of last year, we had been working towards institutionalization of the Better Learning program with the education authorities. We were very close to considering our Better Learning program institutionalized, but now we're kind of back to square one in Gaza. That process does continue in the West Bank, but various impacts from the war and the economic strain that's being felt in the West Bank among government services has meant that that process has slowed down as well. Next slide, please. So here, this is what the phases look like when I'm talking about phase 1, phase 2 of the education sector emergency response plan. Phase 1 is what we're doing at the moment. It's what we can do while hostilities are ongoing and while we're facing many challenges in terms of humanitarian response. It's very much focused on MHPSS and recreational sessions. And as a sector, we've pulled resources together. We're doing rapid emergency trainings for our facilitators and regular learning circles to support those facilitators to exchange ideas and to discuss among themselves, and also to get some relief because the work that they're doing is very intense, considering the setting as well. We are engaging with parents and caregivers. So on the previous slide, we mentioned parent clubs. These are acting as kind of informal PTAs at the moment, providing us as NRC a way to sustain engagement at a very local level in the sites that we're working, to better identify very localized challenges and try to come up with solutions to those challenges for service provision. But we've also found that the parents are very much eager and interested to engage in PSS themselves, to receive PSS for a start, but to be better equipped to support their children as well. So we're finding that the engagement in those parent clubs is more significant than what we anticipated at the start. We're also doing sensitization and relief activities in supported sites, so a little bit differentiated from our recreational sessions. We're working with the Gaza Circus School to kind of have activity days in which we sensitize children, parents and caregivers, site management, community leaders, and other adults in the sites to understand the purpose of our programming and what it can bring at the moment. I saw a question about providing MHPSS support when so many other needs are going unmet, and especially basic needs. And this is the question that we're continuously asking ourselves as NRC, but also as an education sector. In terms of the sites where we're working as NRC, these are sites that we're providing additional support in as well, and where we determine that it's appropriate to be providing the support at the moment. The response has been more positive, more excited, more interested than we were anticipating from the beginning. I won't speak too much on that because my colleague Assad, he speaks to that very well in the note that you'll hear in just a few moments. Looking towards phase 2, this is what we're planning for. This is a full-scale education and emergencies response. So this is where the return to learning comes in. So there'll be continuation, of course, of the MHPSS and recreational sessions. Those will be front and center. But once we get to phase 2, we're also talking about learning. And I've mentioned here learning in non-formal settings. I've seen a few questions about schools. Schools are not operating in Gaza. No schools have been operating since October. No children out of the 625,000 school-aged children in Gaza are able to access education at the moment. The education cluster has estimated through satellite surveys, because that's the possible way to assess at the moment, that over 80% of schools have sustained damage and need repair before they can be functional again. But schools are also being used to host people who've been displaced, which we commonly see in emergency settings across the world. So for phase 2, we're talking about a return to learning. We don't really know what that's going to look like yet. We don't know the curricular content. We don't know who will be engaged to provide that learning, whether it will be people who were working as formal teachers before or a broader scope. We don't know whether it's going to be fully accelerated learning, remedial education, catch-up classes, what the differentiation between formal and non-formal is going to be. But that's something that the sector is working on through a number of working groups, task forces, sub-task forces. We'll be delivering expanded emergency teacher trainings, most likely using the Teachers in Crisis Context training pack. We'll be providing much more material, so it's a much more procurement-heavy stage of the response for teachers and learners. So this will include student kits, teacher kits, materials to equip the temporary learning spaces, and more PSS materials as well. At this stage, we'll be constructing safe temporary learning spaces, probably using tents, but there are other possibilities for that as well. And of course, continued engagement with parents and caregivers. I want to mention here that the further we project into the response, the harder it is to plan because of the level of ambiguity we have around the context at the moment. So right now, what phase 1 looks like, we know that because we're delivering it. We know what's possible. We know what the challenges are. As we move towards phase 2, we have a lot of questions still, as NRC, as the sector, including timelines. We're not able to very accurately project when the transition between these phases will take place, and even whether it will come all at once or in pockets in Gaza instead. Just to mention that there is also a phase 3 of the response, which we're not planning for at this stage. Phase 3 is reconstruction. So that's quite a bit more down the line. Next slide, please. Here, I'd like to echo my colleague Camilla's words. I haven't worked in the sector as long as she has, but I have worked in the sector for around a decade, exclusively in emergency settings, and I'm an emergency education specialist. I have never seen a context in which it's this challenging to provide a humanitarian response in general or an education and emergencies response in particular. It's every challenge that we tend to face in any emergency, dialed up to the maximum, and then plus, with additional challenges and complications as well. So I could talk about this at length. I won't, but I want to highlight some of the main challenges here. The humanitarian access to and within Gaza, it remains severely limited. So this means that our capacity to access sites is very restricted. It's not guaranteed. It's difficult to plan. I've mentioned here to and within Gaza, but I'd also like to mention the access to get out of Gaza. For the international staff, people who agree to go into Gaza and stay there. We have, of course, a rotation, but there's never a guarantee that they're going to be able to get out when it's time for them to come out. And then, of course, for our national colleagues, that's a completely different question, which Assad will speak more about in his note. We're struggling, as all the partners are, with supply chains. The markets in Gaza are not functional. There are very few items available on the ground, so we're talking about international procurements, which means that costs are high. This is a very expensive response, especially once we move towards phase 2, which becomes a lot more procurement heavy, as mentioned. So we have high costs, but there's also a challenge in terms of bringing items into Gaza, as I'm sure everybody on the call is very well aware of. The number of trucks that are permitted to enter Gaza is woefully insufficient. And of course, prioritization goes towards trucks containing food and other items that meet basic needs. Safety and security, it's never guaranteed in the places where we work as humanitarians, but what we find in Gaza is that our usual assurances, our usual mechanisms for mitigating risks about safety and security are not present, as we've seen from events in the last week as well. So this, of course, is safety and security of the children that we're serving, the instructors, their families, and our implementing staff. It remains a constant concern. And then contextual volatility. So as I mentioned, the further we project into the response, the harder it becomes to plan and anticipate what that's going to look like. So we have to be quite broad with our planning. We have to kind of keep in mind a number of possible modalities, of timelines, things like that. We have to communicate that to our donors, to whom we're accountable, of course, and work with them to make sure that that understanding extends to how we can deliver our programming. Thank you very much. I won't speak further. We're going to listen now to a note from my colleague Assad. Assad is our project coordinator. He's on the ground in Gaza. He's been leading the response for NRC so far. He is unfortunately not able to connect today, but he has a voice note that he's recorded that will also take us through the slides. Thank you.
I'll now invite my colleague to play the recording from Assad. While we wait for the recording, please, I'll invite the panelists to look at the questions and respond or come up with a response for what has been posted in the Q&A chat. And I will still invite us, if you have any other questions, please feel free to post them in the Q&A chat box. Yes, David. Yes, David.
I'm just checking on whether the video is being heard properly.
It's a voice note. It's
Yeah, I mean, like the voice. Is it being heard properly?
No, we can't hear anything.
Oh, sorry.
Yes.
I'm so sorry.
Are you playing it now? You're on mute as well.
I was just checking on where the problem could be. Just a second.
Okay. Okay, that's fine. When you're ready, you can let me know. In the meantime, we can be looking at the questions that have been posted and be able to start responding to them. So there was a question to Daria. Would having the parents or relatives present in the recreational sessions be beneficial, or is that not a good idea?
Thanks very much. It could be. I would say not for all of the sessions, because the sessions also allow parents and caregivers some time to go about other things they need to do. So time where their children are safe, cared for, engaged in meaningful activities that takes a bit of burden off them as parents and caregivers. But it might be helpful to have them engage directly in some of the sessions, which is something we could look at. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that. Another question I'll pick in the meantime is someone asked, who did the situational analysis for the PSS in Gaza? Can you share this with us? I'm not sure what you meant by this question. However, all the reports that have been presented today will be shared with you through email, and we've posted the links on our chat. If you would also like to look at the webinar we had last month, if that is what you meant by the situational analysis in Gaza, please go to our YouTube page and you will be able to find the recording there. If that is not clear, please feel free to ask again your question and we'll be able to respond to it more effectively. Dr. Ritesh, you've answered all your questions?
I think so.
Okay. And then there's a question by Zainab who was asking, I am a children's writer and I'm involved in preparing a program to be presented to the children in Gaza soon. Her question is, would a time of storytelling and fun-based activities be beneficial to them, which I think you've answered, Daria? Would it help in their psychological well-being and give them a sense of relief, even if it's for a brief while?
Absolutely, absolutely. So that's what we found through our recreational activities already and through the resources that we have. And this question brings to mind our Miskit storybook package, which even before we started delivering our activities, our staff were using with their children and were giving really positive feedback on. So absolutely, that would be wonderful to do. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you for responding to that. There is someone who has asked if they could be able to get contacts for organizations working in Gaza in the field, because they are an Arab resource collective organization, and they're working on a digital library for children on one of their program websites. Please note at this point that we have created a community of practice channel for Palestine as INEE. We will be sharing the link with you as well on email, and we could proceed with this conversation and other conversations on this channel and any other channel that is available to you through INEE. We'll also share all the resources from NRC with you on email, and any contacts that would be relevant to connect you with any resources they have or any other materials that you'd like to get from them. There's a question here. Which role can digital online interventions play now and in the future in Gaza? And this is open to anyone on the panel.
I can jump in on that. So we're talking about digital and online learning, I expect, or perhaps access to resources. I would be really cautious about emphasizing that aspect of a response or those kind of resources, because at the moment, connectivity is extremely challenging, even for our staff who have, of course, all the devices, they have access to the office with an internet connection that should be working most of the time. I could say that it doesn't. So for people who are in displacement sites with extremely limited access to electricity, who don't have all of their belongings with them, if they can access those resources, they might be helpful, but relying on access to those resources would not be suitable at this time.
Okay.
Thanks.
Thank you for that, Daria. David, you're ready? We can proceed with the voice notes.
Let's give it a try.
Okay. Then we will come back to the other questions. We have not ignored any question. We'll come back after this, listening to this recording.
Hi everyone, I'm Asad Ashur from Gaza, the education coordinator.
We can hear you.
Is it being heard?
Yes, we can hear it. Thank you, David.
Coordinator. Hi everyone, I'm Asad Ashur from Gaza, the education coordinator in Gaza office. I'm going today to provide some kind of collected costs from the field. But before that, I would like to talk about my experience during the last couple of months. Despite the profound adversities I have faced, including being forcibly displaced 3 times and enduring a relentless struggle for survival amidst a stark absence of essential services, I remain steadfast in commitment to the webinar. The loss of my home, church memories, dear friends, beloved relatives weighs heavily upon me. Yet it is the absence of recovery tool, those vital instruments that could restore my capabilities and potential, that is most disheartening. This loss hinders my ability, actually, to provide for my 2 children and our family, casting a shadow over our future. Nevertheless, I persevere, driven by a professional dedication that transcends personal tribulation. After a 6 month of bloodshed, 2.5 million people in Gaza are still experiencing a mental health disruption. However, their primary focus is on survival, just survival. In 2018-2019, the NRC reported that 6 out of 10 children required urgent psychosocial support. So imagine the case now in Gaza. While we have more than 13,000 children are killed, over 17,000 children in Gaza have lost their families and are unaccompanied. This is a new vulnerable group in Gaza who requires urgent support from donors and education actors. Tens of children died from a lack of food and water. Over 500,000 children are deprived of education. 67% of Gaza schools will require reconstruction or significant rehabilitation to reopen. Approximately 59% of school buildings used by IDPs as shelter have been directly hit or damaged. These are the schools we previously identified as safe places. We taught our children that schools were the safest places, and that returning to daily routine, with the schools included, was part of the recovery package. Imagine how we would convince the children to restore such a definition. Despite the cause we have, children show a glimmer of hope during services delivered in shelter, and these are some of the quotes collected from the field. A 14-year-old girl from their Yassin displacement site said that I lost
We've lost the sound, David.
engaging in these activities has brought me a sense of calm and reinforced my love for my mother and other family members. They have also given me hope that we can survive. Another 12-year-old boy from Yebna displacement
Esther, did you say that it's a loss of sound?
No, it's okay. You can proceed.
to fly like a butterfly, transporting me away from the horror I have witnessed. Engaging in these activities has brought me a sense of calm and reinforced my love for my mother and other family members. They have also given me hope that we can survive. Another 12-year-old boy from Yebna displacement site said that I was rushing to complete my duties assigned by my father and family for securing food and water in order to participate in NRC's sessions, where I could see and connect with my peers. Now that I have new friends and some free time, I can draw things and practice the exercises I learned even after the sessions, which give me the feeling of returning to school. A male facilitator from the same school also confirmed that in initial stages we were worried about parent responses and whether they would help, support and accept us. Moving from one tent to another tent, and this is, by the way, this is a strategy that we use to inform parents about what we are going to do inside tent and also with their children. Moving from one tent to another, explaining what an RC would do, we listen to a huge number of stories. Parents collectively confirmed the urgent need of bringing children back to normalcy, citing education as vital for survival, as well as a hope for children's security and safety. Your arrival brought safety to all of us. A female parent said that I'm overjoyed and excited for my children because they enjoy recreational psychosocial support activities, restoring their sense of safety. Children returned from the sessions and they practiced the activities with me and their brothers and sisters. I have a boy and a girl participating in the activities, and they are both very happy that they are finally in the same place and doing the same exercise. It's been incredibly rewarding for both of them. A site management confirmed that children demonstrate a strong commitment to these structured activities, even without incentives nor gift, because they help children to form new friendships. These activities also have a direct positive impact on the displacement site. The site management say that where children previously lacked direction and there was a high level of violence among them, children are becoming more committed to these activities, which reduce violence and strengthen their commitment to educational activities. One more site management said that the activities provided are essential for calming and relaxing children. The initial phase of not caring for children on the side has shifted to engaging them in recreational psychosocial support. Our site is made of 4 blocks, and we want NRC to reach out to children to the entire blocks rather than just 2. And this is one of the top priorities in the NRC, and this is an intention to reach out all of our children inside the displacement site. The delivered activities spread a sense of stability and unity among children. These are some quotes, guys. Finally, this last slide shows some of the drawing gifts sent to you by children who participated in NRC activities. And these drawings say the following. Children need to return homes instead of improving their quality of life. They don't need to live like other children on this globe, but they need to survive. You as international community, as education actors, must take a decisive action to implement a sustained ceasefire and to protect civilians in accordance with the international law. Thank you so much.
Daria, do you have any closing remarks?
Thanks very much, Esther. No, I want to leave us with Assad's voice. I think it's his voice out of all of us that's the most important for us to have heard today. Thank you.
Thank you. I think that's a very powerful way to end our presentations, with someone who's actually on the ground and actually doing the work that NRC has been presenting today. We only have 5 minutes left. I will ask the panelists if they could go to the question and answer chat and be able to respond to any questions that have been posted there. As we do that, I'll ask and invite them if they have any closing remarks before I go back to the questions on the chat box. Dr. Ritesh, any closing remarks?
No, I think I think Assad's comments, a dear friend and colleague of ours from NRC Gaza, speaks more power than any other words that we've heard today, and I think highlights both the injustice and the need for kind of thinking both within and beyond the current response. So I think we leave it there.
Okay. Okay. Fabio, anything?
No, not from my side. As Ritesh and Dario said, I think, yeah, messages is quite clear. Thank you.
Okay. Okay. Camila?
Yeah, the voices from Assad, the children, facilitators, the teachers who are there really tell us that we need to step up to the work that is ahead of us. I think I echo Carmen Valle's need to really coordinate. Coordination will be and continues to be key in this situation. We need all together to walk the talk. And I'll just leave you with some of these links. And I'm sure that Esther will share all the documents and resources that we have talked about today. Thank you.
Thank you, Camila. I think we'll go to the last slide and listen to a clip. Is it there? Okay.
Which one, Esther? Esther, you know which
Camila,
clip it is?
will you be able to play it on your end? Or Daria?
We had a 1-minute commercial that I had put on the last slide, but I'm not sure. I cannot play it from my laptop.
Is that like the slides you presented? From your slides, your own slides?
It is okay.
Perhaps we can share that with the newsletter, the email that goes out.
Yes.
Maybe we could have a few more minutes of Q&A.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for that suggestion. Just to look at the Q&A, I hope the translators can translate for us the question in Arabic and we can be able to respond to that. Looking at the chat, there's a question here, or it's an invitation for thoughts. Hello, thank you all for the insightful information. Unfortunately, there's severe lack of basic needs and safety and security based on Maslow's pyramid, and I'm sure Daria did highlight this. We are discussing the need for mental health while the primary need is unmet and the focus is on survival. The mental health challenges are related to intergenerational trauma, which goes beyond the current understanding of trauma exposure. Is it feasible to even consider intervening on other levels when the response to primary needs are non-existent? The idea is we cannot give the illusion that we can intervene unless these needs are addressed, primarily the needs of food, shelter, safety, and security. Discussing any other intervention would encourage the assumption that the situation can be addressed or dealt with without the other areas being resolved. I wonder what your thoughts are on this. I believe, Daria, you had touched on this.
Yes, thanks very much. So as mentioned, it's something that we're, as a sector, I mean, the education sector, but also as a humanitarian community, that we're talking about as well. I mean, the extent of the needs in Gaza are so significant, so severe, that it takes a collective response, and even that collective response, of course, is insufficient at the moment. At least in part due to the challenges that I highlighted as well. But from what we observe, the support needs to be given alongside other support. It shouldn't wait. It is life-saving in its own right, so it should be part of that initial emergency package of support that's being delivered. In terms of the more technical understanding of intergenerational trauma and how that can be addressed through different responses, I'll leave that to other colleagues to speak of. But in terms of the humanitarian response, this should absolutely be part of that first phase package. Thank you.
Thank you for that response. Allow me to stop the question and answer session there for today. We have run out of our time, and we promise to be able to respond to any questions that were put in the chat box or in the Q&A chat, and be able to send them back to you with the panelist responses. Please note, we'll share the recording of this meeting and any other material or links that were presented or highlighted in today's session. We'll also continue to share the INEE resources that can continue to help in responding and supporting the situation, even as we continue to hope for the best. With that, I want to thank the panelists for all the insightful information and presentation today. Thank you for your invaluable knowledge and for being so passionate about supporting the situation in Gaza. We truly appreciate that. I also appreciate my colleagues from the INEE Secretariat who supported to make this webinar possible. Thank you for everyone behind the scenes. Thank you for the support you have given in planning and even in being present today. Thank you to everyone who joined. I also want to say a special thank you to everyone who's joined from the Gaza region. Thank you for being intentional to join us today. And for everyone else who's also joined us from different parts of the world, I truly appreciate you for being here today. As we come to the end, thank you for taking the time during this holy month of Ramadan. And as we look forward to celebrating Eid, on behalf of the Secretariat, I wish you all a happy and a blessed Eid. And with that, I bring today's webinar to a close. Thank you.